Hey
Hey,
y'all, welcome to the community table. My name is Ina Korverk. This is a community table for Am I Neurodivergent? I'm joined with my colleague, Dr. Reddy, and I'll give myself a little intro before. My name is Ina. I'm a licensed professional counselor with our Teaching Collaborative. I get to work in multiple different therapy spaces, but I work primarily with individuals, couples, and families. And I have a specific and more of a growing niche for the neurodivergent space in individuals. So take it away, Dr. Reddy.
Hi guys, I'm Megan Reddy. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. My credentials are not quite right on that. I'm a PhD, guys, not a PsyD. But it's good to have everybody here. I specialize in assessment and diagnostics. So while Ina and myself might be considered the experts, that word feels really uncomfortable for me because I see myself as a lifelong learner. And in the 20 years that I've been in the field, I've seen such a growth and change in myself and also in the profession, especially when we're understanding different ways of processing information and neurotypes. So we're going to do our best to answer questions, give space for information, and we don't know it all. Uh, really, our purpose for being here today, though, is to talk more about neurodiversity to participants who might be questioning their own style of processing information. There's a lot going on right now in social media, tons of self-research websites out in the the internet world. And so we really want it to be a space for more evidence-based information, a place to ask questions, to either understand yourself better or a loved one who might be neurospicy, friend, family member, spouse. So we're going to try to give a brief background, what we mean when we're talking about neurodiversity, but really the crux of our time today is going to be Q&A. Um, when Ina and I talk about neurodiversity, can we go back just a second? Um, we're talking about this full spectrum. So I've noticed that people are using the word neurodiversity oftentimes for autism. And when we use that word, we're including so much more. Yes, autistic neurotypes are included as ADHD, learning disorders, intellectual disabilities, things like Down syndrome. But we also have giftedness here. Giftedness is not neurotypical. We also see that the brain processes different information when we're dealing with things like anxiety, depression, OCD, trauma, and that might be a little bit surprising. So our next idiographic shows why anxiety, uh, anxious brains process information differently. So we can see anxious brains have a difficulty focusing because we're constantly on edge, on the lookout, a little hypervigilant. It's we're worried about missing information, and so we can focus on the details and kind of miss the forest for the trees, so to speak. Because we're processing so much information, anxious brains also tend to process more slowly. We're really primed to be perfectionistic, not wanting to make mistakes. And so we can also have this overreaction to making mistakes in our brains. And we know that whether it be OCD, anxiety, generalized anxiety, anxiety related to trauma, that we're more prone to a fight, flight, freeze and our mind going blank.
Hmm.
So this is the reason why we're including things like OCD, PTSD, depression, anxiety under the overall umbrella of neurodiversity.
So as we jump in to kind of explore more of this piece around neurodiversity, honestly around that whole part of that beautiful circle diagram that we had. We're going to use a software called or platform called Slido. So as we get started, I'd like for you to just kind of, you can scan the QR code with your camera. You can also go to slido.com and put in the code 4063854. This is a great way for us to confidentially all share our own viewpoints, share your own thoughts. And if you have any troubles with it, please put it in our chat so we can have one of our team members support you in getting onto Slido's website. But we're going to be using this as we ask our questions and mainly for our discussion-based work that we'll be doing today. So, any questions about getting onto this so far? No? I don't see any shaking.
Wait, can you put that up again? Yeah, because my camera didn't get it, so.
We'll leave it up for a few seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
And I think our tech support Hutan also put the link in our chat to access it that way.
Okay, great. All right. Let's jump on to the next piece here. So this picture, this graphic, I think is a really good explanation of like what neurotypicals maybe might be expecting in terms of how active listening works, right? They may be more able to focus on what's being said. They can repeat back things that they've heard, pretty decent at eye contact, maybe more confident in asking questions or initiating conversations. Oftentimes, they may be able to ignore these distractions, whether it's external or auditory or just like other stimuli. They're able to kind of focus in and hone in on a specific conversation or reading or whatever it may be. Because this is a good example of what maybe active listening has been maybe taught or told that maybe for someone who's neurodivergent or neurodiverse doesn't really connect with, or this process in general just looks really different. So for our first Slido question, we want to look at like, what does your active listening look like? Okay, nodding along, staring into space. I do that all day long. Okay, that's good. Less eye contact, gaze averted. Okay. Asking questions. Taking notes. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. Asking for clarity. Okay. Commenting on the conversation. Okay. It sounds like a lot of this is more focusing on um, trying your very best to like give them a lot of attention and that you're being present. And that's also can be a lot of work sometimes to really hone in on doing that. And also fidgeting. Okay, I'm a fidgeter. I tend to fidget when I'm trying to listen and make sure I'm not moving my hands too much or and I'm almost like honing in my distraction somewhere else. Okay. Reflection. Okay. Mm. Wanting to make sure you understand interruption. Okay. These are great. This is great. Awesome. So with that in mind, with some of this active listening and some of the examples of what neurotypicals and how it looks like versus how maybe it's some of us in this space are questioning our neurotype, thinking about the differences between the two of those, this question I think is pretty broad, but also quite vulnerable of like, why are we questioning our neurotype? So if you can just take a few minutes now and just maybe just in reflection and vulnerability of sharing like what brings you here today? What's the itch or exploration of wanting to know more about your neurotype? Mm. Influencing by the gram. Okay, Instagram taught you that. All right. Felt that. Okay. Getting older and anxious. Okay. Hmm. Autism in the family. Okay. Yeah. If you're normal. Hmm. Okay, feedback. I'm curious to know if that feedback is from friends or family, work. Who shared that? Forgetfulness.
I also kind of pulled out the not feeling emotions as deeply. That has me thinking about like interoceptive differences. And again, our nervous system, how we process some of those internal experiences like emotions for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in general, the exploration of this is vulnerable. And what I'm seeing a lot too of maybe we're here for not just ourselves, but our children, friends, or family. Um, yeah, maybe seeing if it's something that is in your family genetics or system, how that shows up. Wanting more information, better information. Okay. Yeah. I'll leave a few more minutes for this. There'll be some folks just joining in still. Hormone diagnosis. Okay. How it integrates in our identity. What does it mean to have a neurodivergent identity? How much does it impact us? How little? Hey. Unique giftings and how to use them well. I think that's really powerful because oftentimes, especially with stigma, being neurodiverse can be something that is negative or frowned upon given the current climate and administration. It's almost something that's like we must cure and not accept. And that can be really painful when, especially if we're looking to have more information about ourselves in that space. Okay.
So one of the reasons why we're having this community conversation today in April is because April is Autism Awareness Month. But it does feel really, really timely. Like Ina was just saying, the current political climate and certain developmental differences, we're going to cure them with our current administration. But somebody also put the gram. There is so much happening on social media, which is great in many ways because it's made information much more accessible. I think it has expanded the general public's information and education of what things like ADHD, autism, giftedness actually include and might look like. So we really wanted to take that opportunity to use some of that momentum from social media, but match it with hopefully higher reliable source information than we sometimes find out on the gram and the TikTok.
Yeah. I think that's a constant question, or even with my own clients of like, hey, TikTok told me I'm autistic. Is it true? Can you tell me if this is true about me? And in my own therapy work, I've seen, especially over time with some of my clients and longevity of working with them, of like something feels wrong with me. I don't feel like anybody else. I feel misunderstood. Everyone's figured out who they are, or maybe just the constant question of, am I neurodiverse? Like keeps coming up. The frequency, the curiosity about it has always grown over time. And I think that's, you know, grounds to be like, hey, maybe we're onto something here. Whether it is someone who is autistic or has ADHD, OCD, trauma, there's still spaces to be like, is it more social anxiety? Is it something else? Is it maybe both? Where if it's more than just a fleeting thought, then maybe it's worth it to get some of that second opinion. Maybe it's, and maybe for good reason, it's valuable to devote the time and also exploration of yourself to find maybe some of that affirming knowledge or information. And I think with that too, like the validity of that experience is really important. It's really hard to be in certain spaces where, like, whether you are neurodiverse or not, but there being a lack of exposure or maybe just affirmation of like, it's okay if you have ADHD and you're in college, or it's not a negative thing that you're struggling with the way that you're processing information or not. And that can be really hard growing up when it's like, I'm constantly doing more work, fighting really hard to get to a certain level of degree or focus or accomplishment. And I'm always struggling and no one seems to give me an answer. Oftentimes, just validating the experience of someone who is neurodiverse, it is difficult to learn about it, but also to welcome in the process of evaluation and diagnosis.
Yeah. And, Ina and I find ourselves more in the formal diagnostic landscape. And so we often see clients who are seeking that formal process. But I really believe and validate the self-diagnosis process as well. When we think about each of their strengths and weaknesses, they're a mirror. They're two sides of the same coin. When we're thinking about self-diagnosis, the nice thing is there's no cost associated. This is you on your own time doing research, reading articles, watching videos, getting into spaces where you're just learning about different experiences and seeing yourself reflected or not. It's nice that there's no medical record. I had a conversation yesterday with a client coming in about we're living in somewhat uncertain times when it relates to some of these diagnoses, and just really having that informed consent process of once we're utilizing insurance and submitting claims and we're putting a diagnosis on there, we really don't know how that information may be used or may not be used in, the days, weeks, months, years to follow. Self-diagnosis is also inherently affirming. You're the one resonating with experiences and identifying with a certain neurotype or label. The cons, though, are really about accessing supports without a formal diagnosis, whether it's a student in school, an adult student in school, like grad school or college, even workplace accommodations, social security, disability. You need that formal diagnosis in order to access those supports. Even medication, especially for something like ADHD, if you're looking to get meds, most doctors want you to go through that formal diagnostic process to make sure that that's the right treatment for you. There can also be an experience, Ina and I have certainly seen a number of people come in, say like, I'm sure I'm X, but nobody in the world believes me. And so I'm here to get that formal diagnosis. So my friends, my family stop invalidating my experience, and like I have it confirmed for them. The cons of a formal diagnosis is that it can be expensive. We do have that, if we're using insurance, we can have that paper trail following us, and you're setting yourself up that somebody like myself might not see it the same way. You might not get the diagnosis or any diagnosis that you're expecting. So just a little bit about the self-diagnosis process. There was recently this study put out that looked at young adult ADHDers who were looking mostly at TikTok content. The study, if anybody wants it, is a double-edged hashtag ADHD related TikTok content and its association with perceptions of ADHD. And just like running through these bullet points here, we see that half of the ADHD labeled content in the top TikTok videos about ADHD actually are not aligning with our diagnostic criterion. So this might be things like rejection sensitivity gets talked a lot about with ADHD. And sure, ADHDers may have higher rates of rejection sensitivity than neurotypicals, but we see that rejection sensitivity in anxiety, in depression, in trauma, and so many other experiences as well. It's not purely symptomatic of ADHD. People who are watching more videos around ADHD are more likely to self-diagnose, to see ADHD everywhere around them, and also perceive symptoms as pretty severe. When these young adults were looking and rating the quality of videos compared to a group of psychologists, videos where psychologists are saying, oh, this is really inaccurate, this is really not good information, were rated much more positively by the young adults. So what these findings really highlight is that social media has had a big influence on diagnostic awareness, which is great for accessibility. We're having a gap here with the evidence-based psychoeducation. And that's like where me and Ina are hoping to fill the gap a little bit today.
Yeah.
So we want to stop yammering at everybody and really open up this space for questions, conversation, dialogue. You can take yourself off of mute, pipe something up that way, type into the chat if that feels more comfortable.
I think there are some questions in the Slido already too that people put in.
Yeah, I was going to bring one up that kind of goes along with what you've already been talking about, which is kind of self-diagnosis versus formal diagnosis. So there was one question in the chat that said, what do I do if I'm curious about my neurodiversity, but may not want to do formal testing? So you talked a little bit about what self-diagnosing can look like, but can you go in a little bit more about that process, especially if someone doesn't want to pursue formal testing?
So one of the links that is in the chat right now, there's actually 2 links to open source questionnaires. The Embrace Autism website is a little bit more specific to autism, but there's a lot of different questionnaires that you could take there. And I think that's a good first step, place to kind of investigate, see what results you're getting there. And then the psychologytools.com has open source kind of screeners for almost any diagnosis out there, from things like eating disorders, OCD, ADHD, anxiety, bipolar. So those are the places that I would initially kind of check out and play around with. Because again, like the TikTok content is not always super accurate, but I think getting into spaces, maybe following some content creators who have a diagnosis that you're wondering about is also a place where you can explore, are my experiences kind of aligning with theirs or not?
Yeah, I definitely think also when if there's any kind of concern, maybe fear, or just like hesitancy of like, do I want to do this? I'm not sure. If we're not already speaking to a therapist or a licensed professional counselor of any kind, we want to do that maybe. Opening up the door of like, hey, I'm curious about my neurotype. I maybe want to do some questionnaires, but I'm not really sure about formal diagnosis. And are there reasons as to why? Is there fear of being labeled? How it impact my life if I found out if I was autistic or ADHD or OCD or any of those things? Like sometimes the formalness of it all can be the most daunting thing. And what could be more gentle and affirming and more just like safe to explore it might just be with a one-on-one therapist of exploring, especially someone who has maybe more of a niche expertise in some of that ADHD, autism, neurodiverse, spicy stuff, where they can, I think, just hold the space for it, where there's not a push to get an answer or need to get an answer, but there's the space to be curious and just work with that. Yeah.
And I can bring up another questions that came up here, which plays into what we just talked about. And the question is, what factors play into a misdiagnosis?
Wait, can I give
Dr. Reddy is chuckling.
Wait, can I give an example, Dr. Reddy? Is that fair?
Uh-huh.
So I get the privilege of working with Dr. Reddy at Ready Mind and for assessment and testing. And there's so many times where I'm like, Dr. Reddy, I think I have a therapy client. I think maybe I have this inner inkling. I have that therapist sixth sense. I don't know. Something feels neurospicy. And I'll sit with her and we'll break it down. And then she's like, oh, maybe this sounds more like trauma. And it's just like the symptoms are quite similar, right? And so for me, as a learning and growing clinician, there's something about the comparing the diagnosis and parallels. Can it be both? Is it one or the other? And I think as a therapist, I can avoid misdiagnosis with consistent asking of help, supervision, all those things. But when you're the clinician making that decision or giving the diagnostic the diagnosis, I think it is the validity of all the information, having enough data where I think maybe with a self-diagnosis, we can self-diagnose consistently, right? I think with the formal, it kind of gives a bit more of, we have all this different spaces of data where we can compare and make those contrasts and come with the decision that feels more agreeable to someone's lived experience. But I don't know. That's kind of the example I have when working with you, Dr. Reddy. But
Yeah, actually, there's a psychologist who has a great website. The name I don't know, but if you Google Misdiagnosis Monday, you'll come across all of these Venn diagrams that will have like PTSD, OCD, like what is shared and what is separate to each diagnosis. She's got them for pretty much anything. Factors that play into misdiagnosis, I think a big part is subtle presentations. If you're coming to me as an adult and you've made it through school, especially like college or post-college education, you've been maintaining fairly regular employment for adulthood, you're paying your bills, you're living independently, I think there are a lot of practitioners out there who will say, you're functioning at a high enough level, there's not a clinical deficit. And so I think part of the misdiagnoses happen because of training. You know, I started grad school about 20 years ago. Our definition of autism has grown exponentially, especially in the last 10 years. I see the comment that someone that they were ADD, which would really be ADHD inattentive type for years, but really the assessment process came back as like a subtle presentation of autism. I am sure 15 years ago, I probably was someone who offered an ADHD diagnosis where if they came to my door now, that might not be the determination that I come back to. And part of that has to do with diagnostic shifting and changing. Assigned females at birth individuals often are overlooked or misdiagnosed with personality disorders or things like OCD versus a neurodevelopmental condition. So I think gender and gender identity can come into play. And it's just not a perfect science. We don't have a blood test to say, ding, 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 that's the answer. Oh, Sathara found the misdiagnosis Monday link and threw that in for everybody.
There's another question that came in kind of along that, talking more about diagnosis, misdiagnosis. Can you talk a little bit more about the criteria for diagnosis? I'm assuming this might be for ADHD or autism, and what that can look like.
Okay. So if anybody wants to pipe in on which diagnosis they're wanting to hear more criterion about, because there's like 20, so that would take forever in our time together.
We have been talking about ADHD, so maybe focusing on that.
Okay. So with ADHD, I just hate the label of itself because it's attentional control. It's not attention deficit. So ADHDers, it's not that I just can't focus, but it's more on when I'm approached with non-preferred activities, tasks, duties, getting into the thing is just a really heavy lift compared to when something is a preferred interest. Maybe we can hyper focus. Maybe we can get into time blindness and like the day gets away from us. You know, when we're thinking about ADHD, we have 9 inattentive symptoms that relate to things like daydreaming during conversations and not remembering what a conversation was about, misplacing items around the house, careless mistakes. That's another word I don't love, but this would be like not putting my name on my homework paper, forgetting to turn the page over. I can't tell you how many questionnaires I get where the backside hasn't been completed. It's like, we gotta turn that page. There's 50 more questions for you to do. These are more those executive functioning pieces, problem solving for a larger assignment or task, breaking things down into component parts. Do you want to grab hyperactive, impulsive, Ina, or you want me to run through those?
Well, I think when we consider like ADHD in childhood, or especially like the textbook version of it, it's like normally I picture like, or I was taught young boys like bouncing off the walls. You can't sit still. You interrupt every conversation, racing thoughts. You talk a mile a minute. You're staring out the window. Some people might even say you're disruptive in class clown. You don't pay attention. You only pay attention if you're yelled at. Like, those are some of the things that people talk about, some of the focusing, but also impulsivity. And I would say in adulthood, it looks more like, well, I'm going to clean my kitchen, but wait, I got to clean the couch too, and then clean this and clean that. And I'm kind of bouncing around, not completing one thing at one time. There's a consistent drive to switch to something else right away. And I think when we think about anxiety popping in too, with someone who has ADHD, there's this consistent place around like, I didn't accomplish anything. I can't get things done. I feel maybe even like inadequate. I feel at a loss, and I'm not, my own routines aren't working to do this, to execute said task, right? That's some of the stuff I see as well. But it also, I think, compares with that trauma comparison. Is this something that's also symptoms of someone who has trauma, or symptoms of someone who has ADHD? So,
yeah. And very quickly for autism, because when we think about neurodiversity, these are the two most common kind of neurodevelopmental diagnoses. There's two main criterion. Kind of social relationships, which would relate to things like, how is it for me to establish relationships? How is it for me to maintain relationships? How good am I at detecting and interpreting nonverbal social cues? Do I understand why a person is upset, or is that a little bit more confusing to me? Do I tend to communicate in a very direct manner? And so when I pick up the phone to text my friend because I have a question, I just ask the question rather than do the social niceties of like, hey, been thinking about you. What's up? What are you up to? And then get to my question. Then there's some of we call them behavioral, because they're more observed, but they're really internal experiences, which might be sensory processing differences, preference for routines and sameness, keen interests. We might have some repetitive behaviors. I just had a family in with me at 9 o'clock, and the son does a lot of that with face. And then his dad, when I pointed that out, the dad was like, well, I always am chewing on the inside of my cheek. So some of those behavioral pieces, picking at fingernails is very common. Biting, skin picking would be very common repetitive behaviors. I see we have a lot
of other questions.
I don't know anything else that's on the rise. ADHD really blew up in the 90s for that one. Autism had a change in diagnostic criterion about 10 years ago. So new things might be on the rise the next time the publishers of the DSM decide that they need more money. So they're going to publish a new edition and change things around on us again.
This one was actually liked. It was sent a while ago. Can neurodivergence be an excuse for difficulties in relationships? I get to work with couples when I see different neurodivergent aspects, or partner A or partner B is neurodivergent. And that often can be an excuse that I see a lot. And it's also like, meaning excuse, it can be like weaponized. Like, oh, I have ADHD, so I forgot like our anniversary, right? And there's a point where I think can we can we build skills, especially the therapy space, to around someone who's neurodivergent and support them in a way where they can navigate life with said identity. But also it does show up, I would say, in family systems a ton, and it can be difficult in managing those relationships.
I'm having a hard time with the word excuse. I think a neurotype mismatch is undoubtedly going to cause some conflict and tension in a relationship.
Yeah.
And I think about the double empathy problem that really came out of more autism research. But it's very easy to blame the neurospicy person in the relationship. And what we know about communication is it takes two to tango. And as much as maybe the neurodivergent individual in a relationship has a responsibility to understand their partner's needs and communication style, the same goes the other direction. And so I think oftentimes the neurotypical partner will have an expectation that I'm doing things the right way. You're the problem. You should do it the way that I'm doing it. And so I don't know that it's an excuse so much as both parties have to work on compromising and really be effective in communication and clarifying those dilemmas, those perpetual problems they're facing, to work through and figure out what is the solution that is going to work for their particular relationship.
You guys kind of got into this as well, but there was another question about relationships too. Can you talk about any other strategies that can be helpful for maybe a more neurotypical person to more effectively communicate and bridge that gap?
I think coming to spaces like this, learning more, Amazon has tons and tons of books out there for, like, my spouse has been diagnosed with that. But I think a really big skill is just recognizing my partner's approach is going to be different from mine. It doesn't mean that it's worse. Like, there's not a judgment or valuation. And like, there are certain things in my relationship where I just own it because how my partner does it does not work for me. So I just say, like, that's the thing that I'm always going to do because I like the way I do it better. And for other things, say, that might not be the approach that I would take to that, but it's not on my plate. So I'm going to free myself from having an opinion about how it gets done and just care that it does get done.
Yeah, I definitely think myself as someone who is neurodiverse in my own friendships and work relationships too, I've had to learn, almost relearn, like, what are the things that systems that work for me that I can now then communicate in terms of my work life, things I need from my boss or coworkers or even my supervision, where I'm able to like share the things I'm learning about how my neurodiverse identity affects my job and how it shows up in my job, and there being me having the reflection time to know what I need, and then also me sharing that and in confidence and safety. I would say in interpersonal relationships, it's similar with boundaries, I think, for me, of what can I have the capacity for as someone who's neurodiverse, what things actually feel good to me that I can share with the right and safe people who are able to receive that and honor said boundaries or honor said requests. So I think a lot of that relearning how to relate or communicate can come from the inward reflection of what do I need, how do I function, how do I need to communicate, how do I communicate these things to myself first, that way I can share it with other people. And then I think also the sharing of them in a way that feels sharing to the right people who are safe and are able to receive that information without wanting, like you said, wanting it to be something that's fixed, Dr. Reddy, where it's like your fault, you must change this to manage this relationship. So yeah.
And there's another question I think that goes really well with this. It's also about relationships essentially, but what are some strategies to support individuals who are neurodivergent and have a desire to build consistency? As in, you are in a relationship with that person, or maybe it's part of your family. And then to be more specific, what if it's an individual diagnosed with ADHD? So how to support them if they want to build consistency in their life and you're part of it.
Funny you mentioned that one, Joanna, because I just pulled it and put it in the chat with some of my thoughts. So I
I
said,
didn't even see that. Perfect.
yeah, Russell Barkley's got some really great resources. Oh, the Sathara, what is the AI generator that helps with executive functioning? I know you.
It's Goblin tools.
Yeah, Goblin tools. It's like trying to pull that out. So there's lots of apps that can help with organization, executive functioning, time management. I really like To Do for couples because it's a shared to-do app that has a lot more capability than a like family calendar. But Goblin tools, you'll say like, I want to do X task, break it down into 5 steps or break it down into 10 steps. And so it can really help with that consistency piece. And when we talk about ADHD, the truth is medication is the single most effective treatment. And so if that's not part of the treatment plan, I would encourage you to talk to your doctor about that.
I also think if you're in therapy, if you're currently in a form of a psychotherapy or group therapy, bringing it up of like, are there skills that we can learn that are more focused to supporting my ADHD, managing it, execution of tasks, or scheduling or management. And I think when it's interpersonal relationships, again, it's if you're the said person who has ADHD, there's a piece of inward maybe responsibility and accountability of how can I show up in this relationship where I feel seen and my form of like functioning or the way I do things isn't also accepted, but I'm also sharing that. This is my way of doing my laundry. I do it this way, and I want you to know how I do my laundry this way. And either you can join in on it or you can just accept how I do my laundry. And that's part of our relationship, right? And they're not being a force of this needs to change. It has to be done my way or the highway where we're meeting each other in that. But a lot of it, I think, for someone who's neurodiverse is maybe knowing your need, knowing what makes you feel safe and comfortable with executing some of these things. And I think also having a partner or friend who is receptive and honoring of that process for you. So.
Dr. Reddy, it looks like you answered another chat question in the Zoom chat. So you took a Slido question, brought it to the Zoom chat. So that was the next one. But you did also talk about the kind of collaboration with medical providers and understanding your diagnosis. And someone did ask a question about how is the medical field responding to neurodivergence diagnoses, and when does it matter to tell a physician about a diagnosis? So I guess a family provider, things like that.
Yeah. I would say, and my experience might be biased because I have certain referral sources. So those doctors are sending people to me. So generally have been more open. I've been lucky to have a number of conversations with physicians where they sent somebody for an ADHD diagnosis and got an autism diagnosis to be able to have the conversation about why, to provide resources. You know, I really love Donna Henderson's Is This Autism book. We're having a book club about that at Artesian Collaborative right now. I think every physician should read it. It's about subtle presentations of autism. But it's a work in progress. I think
Yeah.
I'm hoping like the next generation of mental health and MDs, this is going to be more open. I think when do you tell a doctor is really when you're looking for them to offer some sort of treatment. And so again, for something like a learning disability, we don't really have medication for that. Like giftedness, you're not going to treat that. If we're thinking about executive functioning challenges, we might want to look into medication. If we're talking about really significant anxiety or compulsive behaviors, again, those might be helped by medication, and then you would disclose to your doctor.
Yeah. I've had clients come in and tell me like, oh, I have an ADHD diagnosis. And I'm always like, where'd you get that diagnosis from? Tell me more about that. And they're like, oh, my primary care, my pediatrician just told me I had this. And they just gave me some Adderall and it didn't work. And it made me more anxious or made me feel like this. And I'm always wondering like, is there a report? Is there actual neuropsych evaluation where we're like looking through tons of different data to really explore what kind of neurotype you are, what's going on ultimately? And I think that's always, I know there's some therapists in this call. So like, that's always something I would suggest of just asking, like, what kind of evaluation was done? And even for, like I'm not, I don't have a doctorate degree for me to do assessments, but like going through certain forms of questionnaires with my clients, diagnostic stuff, the Diva-9 is a great one to just explore of like, what do I know about ADHD or autistic diagnostic criteria that I can walk through with my clients and see, hey, maybe this is the right time to maybe get an external informal diagnosis. So yeah, we do have about 5 minutes left before we wrap up today. So we definitely want to share a bit more about the things that we do at our teaching collaborative and with Ready Mind. And please, 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 if you have any more questions or any other things, please drop them in the chat before we end up things today. We do have some upcoming events as a team. We do a lot of different things here throughout the next coming months with our community tables, some on mom guilt, men's health. Then we have a few other cool ones that are coming up. And especially if this was something that you enjoyed in terms of, am I neurodivergent? We are willing and open to seeing, is my child neurodivergent? If you're a therapist, are my clients neurodivergent? Kind of exploring and expanding on this conversation. We'd love to hear more feedback from y'all here. Anything else that you'd like to share, Dr. Reddy, before we close out today?
No, I think just thanks for all the questions. Ina and I both were like, there's so many people signed up. How's that gonna go? So hopefully you got some information. You have ideas about where to go next if this is something you're continuing to noodle on and question. And I just really appreciate everybody's openness.
Yeah. So with that, we thank you again for taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And it's also important for us to get out of our heads into all these community spaces. So if you're able to, please take a minute just to complete this survey. Our Teaching Collaborative is a mental health organization that translates mental health science into our practice. And our goal is to continue to host these community spaces and just provide deep conversation and just a willingness to connect in a space like this. So we love if you keep this conversation with your circles and just continue to for your own growth journey to sign up for one of our groups or therapy services. If you'd like to host a community conversation and we want us to be a part of it, we'd love to, be there and support in the ways that we can. So just feel free to send us an email. We do have a survey up in Slido for you. I believe you'll also be getting it through email as well. But we want to thank you for your time again, for the conversation, the slight laughter, if you listen to us laugh about our stuff, and all the thoughts and words. We really appreciate it. So thank you.